and unsurpassed, penetrating and perfect Dharma is rarely met with, even in 100,000 million kalpas. Having it to see and listen to remember and accept, I vow to taste the truth of the Tathagata's words. Good morning, everyone here in the Zendo and on Zoom, and good afternoon to those joining us from California and Oregon. A little thank you to Jack for mentioning the Four Immeasurables a few weeks ago. It got me thinking about them. So that is the topic of today's talk, the Four Immeasurables. They come from pre-Buddhist times, the Brahmavihara teachings, and they got incorporated into Buddhism with a kind of flavor to them of our teachings. They're sometimes called the Four Infinite Minds, the Four Sublime Attitudes, the Four Divine Dwellings, the Four Abodes, the Four Noble Attitudes, and the four are loving kindness, compassion, sympathetic joy, and equanimity. I remember when I first came to Zen practice, I wasn't so interested in these things. I was more interested in the emptiness teachings, no self, enlightenment. It seemed to me teachings on loving kindness and compassion and sympathetic joy seemed kind of obvious, and it wasn't that interesting to me, even though I was a very kind person. But over the years, I've begun to understand that these four qualities are expressions of the teachings of emptiness and no self. They're those teachings embodied in the human form. And so now I really appreciate them. I'll go through each one and also look at ways we can meditate with them. But just as a whole, the first immeasurable, and they're called immeasurables because they have infinite capacity. You know, there's no end to our capacity to be compassionate. There's no end to our capacity to feel sympathetic joy. They can't be measured. They can't be measured both in our capacity to embody them and in the effect that they have, the rippling effect that they have. We cannot measure the effect. So the first, loving kindness, is, in a way, it's responding to people in, you could say, almost neutral conditions. It doesn't require just the simple act of friendliness, simple act of kindness, doesn't require that the other person is in a difficult situation or in a wonderful situation. It's sort of neutral, that you can just have this friendliness and this kindness in any situation. And then the second of the immeasurables, compassion, is in response to difficulty. It is in response to people's restlessness, feelings of dissatisfaction, or their suffering, their dis-ease. The compassion is in response to that. The third immeasurable, sympathetic joy, is in response to positive things that are happening for someone. So it's the first three are interesting. It's sort of neutral, and then in response to negative events, and then in response to positive events. So it kind of covers the whole spectrum. And the fourth is equanimity, which penetrates the other three. All of these are done with an equanimity. And that equanimity doesn't have to look completely calm. One can respond vigorously to a situation, an emergency of some sort, but you can still carry a kind of mental calm. You're not panicking even when you respond vigorously. And when we meet people who have these four qualities, and when they have these four qualities a lot of the time, or we might even meet someone who has these qualities always available to them, they're always functioning from them when a circumstance arises, they are like that. I think when we meet people like that, we do feel that there's something very wonderful going on. We notice it. It's so simple and so humble. And yet I think this is what we truly need and want from each other. We think of somebody like Thich Nhat Hanh, who passed away. He was within the last year. He was like that, and he was absolutely adored and had thousands upon thousands of people devoted to him around the world. He was friendly, he was kind, he was compassionate, he had a lot of joy, and he was very equanimous. So I'll go through each one, just to say a few words about each one and how we can practice with them. So loving kindness is really wishing others happiness, and for them to also experience this kind of loving kindness. So for them to be happy and to also to be able to feel that kind of loving kindness towards others themselves. We can work with this in meditation by silently saying something like, may they be happy, may they be kind and loving. You could say it like that in your own mind silently. You could visualize it, picture someone being happy, picture them also being kind. Another practice that we have is to dedicate the merit of our practice to someone or to something. So you could dedicate your meditation practice to someone and wishing for them that they be happy and that they cultivate kindness. with the second immeasurable, compassion, we're wishing for people to be free from suffering. Maybe it's free of a particular thing that they are suffering right now. It can also be that they be free from suffering in general, that they have less difficulty in their life, and that they understand what the source of suffering is. And in our teachings, we talk about suffering often in two ways. There's the inevitable suffering that comes from simply having a body and living in a material world, a world of appearances, where everything is in a state of flux and things are coming and going, things are breaking down and changing, things are going away and things are arriving. Sometimes things we like go away, sometimes things we don't like arrive. So just being in a body and all that goes with that, there's inevitable suffering. It's inevitable. But a lot of our suffering is the additional suffering of the way we make sense of that first type of suffering. And of course, for many of us in, I guess you could say, somewhat privileged lives, which doesn't mean a life without troubles, but many of us have our basic physical needs met in terms of food and shelter and safety. A lot of the suffering we have is the additional suffering of what we think about ourselves and what we think about others. So we can wish for people that they're free from suffering and that they understand the source of suffering, because when we understand the source of this additional suffering, we can reduce our suffering by a great amount. A great amount. So we can wish that for people. And we can also wish for them that they develop compassion for others. Because when we feel compassion for others, it's this is an expression of like turning the light outward. This is a way in which the teachings of no self are embodied by us. When we turn that light outward toward others and feel empathy and compassion towards them, forgetting about ourselves, when we do that, it's one of the sources of happiness. When we turn the light outward, we're understanding that it's not actually really outward, because we are everything that appears out there, but nevertheless, we do sometimes say it that way. And the third, sympathetic joy, as you can tell by the words, is rejoicing in the good fortune of others. So we wish for ourselves to have the capacity to be joyful for others' good fortune, for them to enjoy their good fortune. But an interesting aspect of this meditation on sympathetic joy is not to wish for their good fortune to particularly kind of keep growing or continue. It's not about the future, it's just having genuine joy for what is arising for them now that is positive. Because otherwise, if it's about I want their good fortune to keep on going, we're starting to lean into trying to control conditions, and our joy is being conditional on things continuing. And really, this is just straight in the immediate, being able to feel joy for someone's good fortune right now. Something that children particularly enjoy, when we can go, whoa, look at you. You're so clever. That's so great. Children need it and love it, and I think we still need it and love it as adults too. We like people to be happy for us when things go well. And then the fourth, equanimity, is wishing for ourselves and for others a calm attitude towards the current situation. That we can navigate our lives and that others can navigate their lives with a mental calmness. Our actions might have to be quick sometimes, but we can be mentally calm. And that mental calmness comes from being able to accept this is the condition right now. This is the circumstance right now. I'll respond as best as I can to this condition right now. I'll do it without resistance. So when we work with these four immeasurables, we can start, there's sort of two different ways to work with them in Zazen, in meditation. If we take loving kindness, we can start imagining someone for whom it's easiest for us to wish happiness toward. That might be ourself, or it might be, say, a child, partner, someone for whom it's not difficult for us to wish happiness. And then sit with it for a period of time, really let ourselves feel this wish for them to be happy. It's not really just saying it like, yeah, I wish my neighbor to be happy. Really say it or visualize it, feel it in your body, see if you can feel it right through your whole body. Relax with it until it feels as genuine as it can feel, that we wish that for them. And when that feels settled, you can sit with that for a while, maybe a few minutes. Then maybe just take a few breaths, just anchor ourselves back in our breathing, noticing our breathing. And then pick somebody else. And it doesn't, of course, need to be a person. We can wish happiness to animals. Pick someone that's also fairly easy to imagine that feeling towards, but maybe is slightly harder. And go through that same process again until it feels very settled in the body, that you can genuinely, or as genuinely as it is possible for you at that time, to wish happiness for them. And move on, continuing until maybe someone for whom it is actually very difficult for you to wish happiness towards. It might be a particular person who has caused you or someone you love harm. Or it could be someone that you just know about more in the world of the news, politics and so on, that you have strong feelings about that maybe are somewhat negative. And see if you can slowly, while working with the breath at the same time, slow your system down and really try to visualize happiness for them. And notice if you can't do that, that you can do it a little bit in the abstract, but you can't quite let yourself actually do it. There's a little part that keeps saying, yes, but they're so, whatever it is. And then you just can be kind to yourself about that. That's where you can then turn it back to yourself and go, I'm not able at this time to really cultivate feelings of love and kindness towards that person. And that's okay, that's where I'm at right now. And just be aware of that. So we can just cultivate an awareness of our limits at this time and hopefully aspire that in the future we will be able to extend feelings of loving kindness to that person. Another way to do this meditation practice is, rather than from the easiest person or easiest being to most difficult being for us, is from the closest, like geographically or in time, to us, and move out that way. These are just interesting ways to explore these four immeasurables. If we do it that way, from closest outward, we kind of think of different people, because we're doing it more from a place of geography. We can move out right around the whole planet. And with each of these immeasurables, there's also sort of like the opposite. So the opposite of loving kindness is anger and ill will. We can notice when we have anger arising in us, or ill will, slight feelings of wanting things to go badly for someone, let's say. If we notice that in ourselves, we don't have to try and squash it. We just need to notice it, be curious about it. What is the source of that feeling of anger? And when we do that, we pretty much always come to feelings of hurt or fear. And we can be compassionate towards ourselves about that. So we don't try and squash the opposite, we try to observe the opposite when it arises in us and be curious about it, and trust that in being curious about it, we will actually want to not feed it. And it will slowly, of its own accord, dissolve. It may take time, and that's okay. And then besides an opposite, there's what's called a near enemy, which means it looks like it sort of masquerades as loving kindness, but actually isn't actually. And one of the things they described as sentimentality. It can be like loving kindness, but sentimentality has a flavor of I am being sentimental about that over there. It lacks the intimacy of true loving kindness. Sentimentality also often serves for a person to feel that they're actually loving and kind without them actually having to be particularly loving and kind. So it has a little bit of a self-serving quality to it. And maybe another near enemy is when our loving kindness is conditional. So we have feelings of loving kindness, but only to certain categories of people or certain categories of beings. There's a limit to that kind of loving kindness. It's not, in a way you could say it's measurable, so it's not one of the immeasurables, because you can measure it. I have loving kindness towards people that look like me, or people in my country, or only towards my own species. So we can just observe these near enemies and opposites in ourselves, and not be harsh, but be observant. So this same sequence we can do with compassion. wishing for others not to suffer, to understand the source of suffering and to cultivate compassion. We can start with people for whom it's easy for us, or beings for whom it's easy for us to feel that compassion, and move towards further and further out to those for whom it's harder for us to feel compassion. Or we can start in close, in terms of time or geography, time and space, and move out that way. We can say the words, or we can visualize the scene, and we can always dedicate the merit of our practice at the end of each sitting period to someone in relation to these four immeasurables. The opposite of compassion is hatred and malice. We can notice if that arises in us. Sometimes, even when we've been practicing for a long time, just a moment of a hateful thought can arise in people, because all of us have been hurt, and hatred comes from fear and hurt. So it can just arise, and it can arise very fast. So we can notice when it arises and not feed it, which means we don't indulge in thinking hateful thoughts. The near enemy of compassion is pity. Pity, again, a little bit like sentimentality. Pity has a sense of separation. Oh, the poor thing down there, over there. I want to give something to them because they're in pain, but there's a sense of like, they are not me and I am not them. The quality is quite different. And I think is one of the reasons why some people don't want to receive generosity from others, because they suspect you're giving it to me as pity, and I don't want that. I have got my own dignity. I don't want you to throw a coin in my face that way. If you want to give me something, treat me with dignity. So if we're going to give something to someone, we do it with respect. We treat them with respect when we give them something. We don't do it out of pity. We do it out of a sense of intimacy, of unity with them, that we would want the same, that we would be the same as them if that we had the same circumstances as them. So with great respect. Whenever we show compassion, we have to do it with great respect. You don't have to do it with great respect, but it becomes an immeasurable when it's done that way. We can cultivate the same with sympathetic joy, being happy for someone when something goes well for them, and wishing for them that they will also be happy for others when things go well for them, for others. We can do it in the same way, as I've just described already. And the opposite of sympathetic joy is envy, which seems so sad to be envious of someone. It just seems so sad. I often think of, like, if we think of every sentient being like our own body, it'd be like one finger being jealous of the other finger because it's got a ring on it or something. It just makes no sense when we think of ourselves that way. So we can be compassionate toward ourselves if a little feeling of envy just suddenly arrives. The near enemy of sympathetic joy is hypocrisy, which is to feign happiness for someone when you don't actually really feel it. So something goes well for someone, and you don't actually feel happy for them, you go, wow, that's so great. But inside you're feeling a little bit of envy. We can notice that if that happens in ourselves. But maybe it's okay to do a little bit of this, idea of trying, sort of fake it till you make it. You try and be happy for someone, even though you're not quite feeling it. Maybe that's okay, as long as our intention, our motivation is that I do want to be able to feel sympathetic joy. I want to feel that. I don't feel it quite now, but I want to feel it, so I'll try it out. I think that's fine, as long as our motivation is genuine. And then the fourth of the four immeasurables, equanimity. And in the teachings it says equanimity stemming from wisdom. And that wisdom is the teachings on no self, the emptiness teachings, also the first turning teachings like impermanence, cause and effect. When we've have a certain amount of integration of those teachings, equanimity just arrives. We don't even have to try to have a calm frame of mind. As these teachings seep into our bones, we naturally become more relaxed and calm, but present. The opposite of equanimity is attachment. We could say attachment and aversion. I want things to be a particular way. I don't want them to be a particular way. It's very hard to be equanimous if you're fighting against reality. And the near enemy is indifference. Sometimes people can appear calm in a situation, and it's not really a genuine calmness. It's actually a lack of empathy. It's a lack of care. And it can be a little confusing sometimes when someone can appear calm, and it's hard to work out, is this coming from a place of wisdom, their calmness, or do they actually not care very much? So they're kind of calm because they're not being affected. It's not always easy to tell. But usually over time, we can tell over time. We can be confused in the moment, but over time with a person, we can see the difference. There's a big difference between indifference and equanimity. So this is something that we can try sometimes in Zazen. Often we follow the breath, often we're listening to sounds as our main practice. But you might want to experiment in morning Zazen sometime, working with these four immeasurables, and see how it feels. You could take one of them for the period of practice, the half an hour or 40-minute meditation practice, and see if you can bring your mind back to this working. Say you're working with loving kindness and you're working from the easiest person or being, moving out to more neutral, slightly more difficult, very difficult. As you're doing that, notice that you drift off and think about something else, and come back. Oh, that's right. I'm trying to do this loving kindness meditation today, and return to it, and see how it feels for you. I want to say one other thing about compassion before we move to questions and comments. And that is that some people, many people actually, have a lot of compassion and a lot of empathy. They're very empathic. They're very kind and compassionate. And sometimes people who have a lot of empathy and a lot of compassion, also some of those people have got their own wounds from the past and have quite a lot of fear as well. And one thing to notice in yourself is when you're being empathic to somebody else and compassionate towards somebody else, are you doing that wholeheartedly, or is part of your motivation that you are scared of that other person? You're scared that they might harm you or they might abandon you if you're not empathic and compassionate towards them. It's quite subtle, but you can have compassion mixed with fear. And when it's mixed with fear, then what is actually happening is you're not truly caring for yourself. You're putting too much emphasis on the other person without genuinely, fully caring for your own needs, out of a fear that if you were to take care of your own needs, something bad might happen. And that's usually inaccurate. And they're the situations in which people stay sometimes in circumstances where they're being mistreated. So I'm mentioning that because often in Zen practice, people with a lot of empathy and compassion come to our practice. We have a lot of people in our practice who have a lot of empathy and a lot of compassion and a real wish to want to do good in the world. And sometimes they don't take care of their own needs enough. Out of this confusion that stems from their own woundedness. And it's another reason why if we do have a woundedness from the past, why therapy and Buddhism go together very nicely. They're very compatible. They can help unravel these mixtures of emotions and help us understand what's wholesome and what's being unwholesome in what's driving us. So they're the four immeasurables, four virtuous practices. You can try them out. All right, let's finish there and open up for any comments or questions from anybody in the Zendo or on the Zoom Sangha. Dirk.
How should we go about helping others who are suffering and resistant to being helped, listening, cynical, sort of world weary, or think they know everything already?
Yeah.
How can we, but obviously suffering.
Yes, good question. How to help people who don't want to be helped? Well, the most important thing is actually to do it in our mind. We wish it in our mind. And I think when we truly, sincerely wish it in our own mind, through our meditation practice and our contemplation practice, I forgot to mention that all of these four immeasurable practices that we've just been going through, you can do them just a little bit for a few minutes while you're putting petrol in the car. Instead of staring and watching the numbers tick over, instead of doing that for those 2 or 3 minutes, you can actually do a loving kindness thing right now. We can do it while we're in line in the grocery store or doing dishes, or we just wholeheartedly do dishes or wholeheartedly be in the grocery line or wholeheartedly put petrol in the car. But we can also do these practices as well at that time. But I think when we wish it wholeheartedly in our mind, subtly something shifts in our body language, and you never know when someone might become receptive to receiving our help. And they're much more likely to if they can sense something in us that has shifted a little bit. And probably a slight caution, we need to keep in mind that we might not know what they need. We often think we do, but we might not. So having them understand that we are available to them might be the best we can do, and in our own mind, going through these 4 immeasurables for them. Yeah. Yeah.
I have sort of been struggling with a situation where a friend is going through something that I have absolutely no experience or depth of the suffering they're going through, and still wanting to be there for them without this feeling of falseness or a false sort of empathy, because you can't connect to that level that they're on.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's trying to be genuine in such a moment seems hard, but obviously very necessary to do for good friendship.
Yeah. Well, it sounds like just the fact that you're aware of that is really wonderful. That you're aware that what they're going through is beyond what you've experienced, so you're not quite sure what they need or how to meet their need. Just you knowing that, I think, is very good. And maybe the best, or one of the things that you could do, is make sure they know that you're very open and curious for them to share anything they want to share, and that you're willing to support in any way you can and be a good listener. I think being able to deeply listen is one of the greatest gifts we can give anyone, and that you're willing to listen to whatever they want to say. But maybe too, not to underestimate your capacity to maybe imagine what they're going through, because we are all very similar. You know, we're all humans, and we might not be able to exactly imagine, but we can, I think, go quite a long way to imagine someone else's difficulty. We shouldn't underestimate our own capacity. So maybe you can more than you think you can. I don't know, but maybe. Yeah, thank you. Okay, I think we'll finish. We'll do the closing chant, and then all of us in the Zendo will get up together and do 3 bows. And people on Zoom are welcome to stand up and bow with us. We've got the chant cards there if you'd like to join in. Beings are numberless. I vow to save them. Delusions are inexhaustible. I vow to end them. Dharma gates are boundless. I vow to enter them. Buddha's way is unsurpassable. I vow to become it. If you'd like to all get up, except Griffin, stay seated. And just bow whatever way you're able to. We do full prostrations if you're up for it. Then you just face inward. Just turn face inward. That's right. Yeah. Okay, let's meet out here in a circle. Oval. Griffin, you could bring the laptop out. Just go out one at a time.